As I promised, this is video 9, where Jesus explains Daniel chapter 12. It's identical. And I'm going to show you so you can connect the two. I'm only going to show you the brief. What you need to do after that is read both chapters together so you can make your own connections. Then you're more sure. We know it's the time of the end in Matthew chapter 24 because the disciples come to him privately saying, what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Well, Daniel chapter 12 is the same. We're going to see the resurrection in Daniel chapter 12 when the 1,335 days are finished. Matthew chapter 24 is the same, 1,335 days. Well, let's start in verse 14. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the inhabited earth for a witness to all the nations. Then the end will come. Well, the gospel is that Jesus Christ has sacrificed his life and saved us. That is the good news of the kingdom, and it's only through his ransom sacrifice that we can be saved. Now, Daniel chapter 12. Jesus explains that same amount of time. Just in verse 7, the man clothed in linen. That's Jesus. There is no other that can promise the resurrection because he is giving the means for the resurrection, his life. That's the good news. Here is the time. It shall be for a time, times, and half a time. There we are. That is 1,260 days. So Matthew chapter 24, it is preached for 1,260 days. Now let's follow the pattern. First of all, look at verse 11. And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, that's the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, and the abomination of desolation set up, there shall be 1,290 days. So this abomination is set up on day 1,290. Once the 1,260 and the preaching work is completed. And you'll see there, Jesus said, and after the times and half a time, the power of the holy people will be completely shattered. Then all these things will be finished. So what is he on about? He's on about the abomination of desolation that is set up after the preaching work, just like Revelation chapter 11 verse 7. I'll show you that because I think it's important. You will notice that they preach. Verse 3, and I will appoint my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days in sackcloth and ashes. Verse 7, now when they finish their testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss, the disgusting thing that causes desolation, will attack them and overpower them. We can see the time frame. Sorry, let's get back to Matthew. So now let's look to see if Jesus has made it clear. After the preaching work in verse 14 comes verse 15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation as spoken of through the prophet Daniel, standing in a holy place on day 1290, whoever reads, let him understand, and then flee, because it's a battle against Christianity. Remember in verse 11 of Daniel chapter 12, and from the day that the daily sacrifice is taken away. That's the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And the abomination of desolation is put in its place. That is the red heifer. And that is on day 1290. The man in linen, Jesus said in verse 12, blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1335. Because that's the time that we will be blessed by the return of Jesus Christ. So it's only 45 days. Now notice what he says in verse 22 about that period when the abomination of desolation is set up. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24, and unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved by the ransom sacrifice of Jesus Christ, because the sacrifice is taken away. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. And Jesus, the man in linen, in Daniel chapter 12, says they are shortened to 45 days. Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1335. So from 1290, there's 45 days left. Let's look further. So now Jesus is going to tell us exactly what happens in Daniel chapter 12 when the abomination of desolation is standing in its place. Let's read on. This is what he said happens in the 45 days. Then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there, don't believe it. False Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. So let's take that warning that Jesus gives us. That is what happens in the great tribulation, when the abomination of desolation is standing in its place. Now Jesus goes on to give us more information. Therefore, if they say to you, look, he is in the desert, to a Jew, they know exactly what that means. The red heifer is sacrificed in the desert on the Mount of Olives, and it's a type of Christ. It's a cleanser. When you see it on day 1290, Jesus carries on and says, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise. In verse 26 he says, he's in the desert, do not go out or look. He is in the inner room, don't believe it. So what does Jesus mean by the inner room? The Greek word he uses here is just an ordinary inner room, but it's referring to what the Jews are doing in Israel, promising to build a temple. And they're saying that God's Holy Spirit will be in it. But oh no, it's a different Greek word for the most holy, because Jesus knows it's false. It's an empty inner room. We're seeing these things come to pass. You've only got to look at what the Jews are planning. The sacrifice of the red heifer to cleanse the temple they're planning on building with its inner room. The first one may be just a tabernacle, a tent, like it was in the days of Moses. Because you have to remember, there's only 45 days until Jesus comes. Let's have a little look. See, immediately after the tribulation of those days, so we know that is that 45-day period. This happens, verse 30, then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, because they followed the red heifer and the false temple. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great trumpet sound, and they will gather his elect together from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. That is the same as Daniel chapter 12. If you look at verse 2, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Daniel was promised that if he waits, or Daniel's waiting in death, but verse 13, but you go your way till the end, Daniel, that's the end of his life, for you shall rest in death, and will arise to your inheritance at the end of the days. That is the 1335 days. That's when Jesus comes with all his angels to collect all the faithful, regardless of whether they're living or dead. I hope you've understood that in Matthew chapter 24, it is identical. If you have, please spread this message, because that's exactly what Jesus wants us to do. Going back to Daniel chapter 12, those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Is that what you want? To be recognized by God as a faithful servant, doing exactly what he wants you to do, to reveal the secret of Daniel chapter 12. If you do, what a wonderful promise you have. You'll shine like the stars forever. It's well worth it. Let's share this video and let's share the knowledge. I'll be back with my final video, this time to look into Daniel chapter 12, so that we remind ourselves and we can truly reveal what's happening there, because we've looked at the 10 videos or the 10 series, and we've looked at the book of Revelation that has revealed it, and now we can truly read Daniel chapter 12 with full understanding. Thanks again for everything. Bye for now. Don't forget to support your brothers who's running this channel. Thanks again. Bye.